High in the modern desert of Iraq, Sumerian ruins whisper a story that challenges everything known about human origins. Conventional science tells a tale of slow, biological adaptation over millions of years. But hidden within the oldest written records on Earth is a different narrative. It speaks of the Anunnaki, travelers from the stars who descended to this world in search of precious resources. The clay tablets describe a moment when these celestial visitors decided to accelerate the course of nature. They speak of a divine intervention, a blending of extraterrestrial essence with the primitive hominids of the ancient wild. Humanity stands at the crossroads of history and myth, wondering if the double helix of the genetic code is not a product of chance, but a deliberate masterpiece of interstellar engineering. What if modern humans are not the children of the Earth, but the greatest experiment ever conducted? The sun rises over the scorched plains of modern-day Iraq, casting long shadows across the ruins of what was once the most sophisticated civilization on the planet. Here, in the cradle of Mesopotamia, the dust of 6,000 years covers the remnants of Sumer. To the traditional historian, Sumer is a remarkable anomaly. It is a place where humanity suddenly and inexplicably leaped from simple hunter-gatherer societies into a fully realized civilization with complex laws, sophisticated architecture, and advanced mathematics. However, a different school of thought suggests that the Sumerian story is not one of human achievement alone. It suggests that the history we have been taught is merely a redacted version of a much older and more startling reality. Beneath the sand lies a library of clay. Thousands of wedge-shaped inscriptions, known as cuneiform, tell a story that challenges the very foundations of modern biology and religion. These are not merely myths or metaphors for the changing of seasons. When translated literally, they describe a world where the line between God and astronaut is non-existent. The Sumerians claimed their knowledge was a gift from the Anunnaki, a term that translates to those who from heaven to earth came. While mainstream archaeology views these figures as winged deities of a polytheistic past, an alternative perspective views them as something far more tangible. They are described as physical beings of immense power and longevity who descended from the stars. The catalyst for this radical interpretation emerged in the late 20th century, centered on the work of researchers like Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin argued that the Sumerian tablets are not poetry, but technical manuals and historical logs. At the heart of this narrative is a celestial body known as Nibiru, or the 12th planet. According to the ancient star charts found in the ruins of Nineveh, our solar system is not composed of the planets we recognize today. The Sumerians depicted a sun orbited by all the familiar spheres, but with one crucial addition. They described a planet with a vast, elliptical orbit that takes 3,600 years to complete a single journey around the sun. This is Nibiru, the home world of the Anunnaki. To understand why these beings would travel across the void to a primitive Earth, one must look at the environment they left behind. The texts suggest that Nibiru was a dying world. Its atmosphere was thinning, and the heat necessary to sustain life was escaping into the cold vacuum of space. The solution was a technological shield made of suspended gold particles. This precious metal was not a symbol of wealth to the Anunnaki, but a vital resource for planetary survival. It was a matter of life and death. When their sensors detected high concentrations of gold within the third planet of our solar system, the expedition began. The arrival was not a peaceful colonial expansion, but a desperate industrial operation. Led by two half-brothers, Enlil and Enki, the Anunnaki landed in the Persian Gulf roughly 450,000 years ago. They established their first base at Eridu, which means home in the faraway. The imagery provided by the tablets is striking. They describe the gods wearing garments that resemble fish scales and breathing through apparatuses that allow them to endure the earthly environment. They were the first miners, the first engineers, and the first masters of the earth. For hundreds of thousands of years, a lower rank of Anunnaki, known as the Igigi, performed the backbreaking labor of extracting gold from the veins of the earth, primarily in the deep mines of southern Africa. The work was grueling and the conditions were unforgiving. In the silence of the ancient mines, a storm was brewing. The Igigi grew weary of their endless toil and the demands of their masters. The texts recount a dramatic rebellion where the workers set fire to their tools and surrounded the palace of Enlil. They demanded a release from their servitude. This was the first labor strike in history, and it brought the entire gold production to a standstill. The crisis forced a meeting of the Great Council of the Anunnaki. Enlil, the commander of the Earth mission, favored a harsh military response to crush the rebellion. However, his brother Enki, a master of life sciences and genetic wisdom, proposed a different path. He argued that there was a way to provide the necessary labor without enslaving their own kind. The solution was to create a primitive worker, a being capable of following instructions and using tools, yet possessing enough intelligence to serve the needs of the gods. This is the point where the Sumerian narrative deviates sharply from the Darwinian model of slow, accidental evolution. Enki did not propose creating a being from nothing. Instead, he looked at the creatures already roaming the African plains. He saw the hominids, the early ancestors of modern humans, who were strong but lacked the cognitive capacity for complex labor. Enki suggested that the Anunnaki could bind their own image onto these creatures. In modern terms, he proposed a genetic intervention. He would take the DNA of the Anunnaki and splice it with the DNA of the indigenous primates of Earth. The tablets describe this process in unsettling detail. They speak of the mixing of the blood and the essence of a god with the clay of the earth. This clay was not soil, but the biological material of the planet. The experiments were conducted in a place called the House of Shimti, or the house where the breath of life is breathed in. It was a laboratory of the ancient world. The first attempts were not successful. The texts speak of monsters and beings with mismatched limbs, the discarded failures of a trial and error process. But eventually, the perfect prototype was achieved. The result was the Adamu, the first man. The name itself is rooted in the Hebrew word for earth or red ground, but in the Sumerian context, it represents the first successful hybrid. This being was essentially a bridge between two worlds. It possessed the physical hardiness of the earthly primate and the intellectual spark of the extraterrestrial creators. The Adamu was not a product of natural selection, but a biological shortcut. It was a living tool, designed for the sole purpose of laboring in the minds of the Abzu. This realization changes the entire perspective of human history. If these texts are to be believed, we are not the pinnacle of an unguided evolutionary climb. We are the intentional product of a sophisticated extraterrestrial race. Our sudden appearance in the fossil record, the so-called missing link that separates us from our more primitive ancestors, is not a mystery of biology, but the mark of the Anunnaki. We were created to be the hands that pulled the gold from the earth so that a distant world could survive. As the Adamu multiplied and the labor crisis was resolved, a new dynamic began to emerge. The Anunnaki were no longer just miners and overseers. They were now the masters of a growing population of servants. They taught the early humans the foundations of agriculture, the movement of the stars, and the secrets of the calendar. These gifts were not given out of benevolence, but to ensure that the human workers could sustain themselves and provide for their masters. The relationship was one of utility, yet it laid the groundwork for everything we call civilization. The city of Uruk rose from the marshes, boasting monumental temples known as ziggurats. These were not merely places of worship, but functional administrative centers where the gods resided when they were on the surface. The people looked up to these structures and saw their creators. They saw the beings who had given them life and who held the power of life and death over them. The Sumerian word for worship is actually the same word for work. To serve the gods was to work for them. It was a literal employment that spanned generations. However, the genetic gift of the Anunnaki came with a hidden complication. By infusing their own DNA into the human race, the creators had inadvertently given their creations the potential for more than just labor. Humans possessed the capacity for emotion, for curiosity, and for a longing for the stars that mirrored their masters. The divide between the human and the divine began to blur. As the population of the Adamu grew, the Anunnaki found themselves dealing with a species that was becoming increasingly self-aware. The tablets hint at a growing tension within the Anunnaki leadership. Enlil, always the pragmatist, saw the expanding human population as a nuisance and a threat to the order of the planet. He viewed them as noisy and disruptive. Enki, on the other hand, felt a paternal connection to his creations. He had breathed his own essence into them, and he began to champion their cause. This sibling rivalry would eventually determine the fate of the entire human race. The story of the Sumerian cipher is not just a tale of the past. It is a blueprint that suggests our modern world is built on the foundations of an ancient extraterrestrial industry. The gold that still drives our global economy, the cities we inhabit, and the very structure of our DNA may all be relics of this original experiment. We are the children of a cosmic intervention, living on a planet that was once a colonial outpost for a world named Nibiru. The question remains, if we were created to be a labor force, what happens when the workers no longer recognize their masters? The answer lies deeper in the clay, waiting to be unearthed. The scale of the operation is staggering. For 40 periods, the younger gods, those known as the Ijiji, have toiled under the oppressive sun of a young earth. This is not the Eden of later mythologies, but a raw industrial landscape. Great channels are carved into the crust of the planet. Mountains are hollowed out. The rivers Tigris and Euphrates are not yet the lifeblood of human civilization, but are instead massive engineering projects designed to facilitate the extraction and transportation of gold. The Ijiji are the labor force of the celestial hierarchy. In the Sumerian tradition, the division of power is clear. The Anunnaki are the lords, the planners, and the masters of the upper realms. The Ijiji are their subordinates, tasked with the backbreaking work of planetary development. As the years stretch into decades, and the decades into centuries, the physical toll on these beings becomes unbearable. They are immortals, yet they are not immune to the exhaustion of the flesh or the erosion of the spirit. In the deep mines of the Abzu, the lower world, the atmosphere is thick with dust and the heat of the earth. Here, the Ijiji swing their picks and haul heavy baskets of ore. The gold they seek is not for jewelry or currency as we understand it. According to the ancient cuneiform records, it is a substance of absolute necessity. Some theorists suggest it was needed to repair a thinning atmosphere on their home world, while others view it as a catalyst for their advanced technology. Regardless of its purpose, the demand for the metal is insatiable. The silence of the mines is broken only by the rhythmic thud of tools against stone. But beneath the surface, a different kind of pressure is building. It is a social and psychological tension that mirrors the tectonic forces of the planet itself. The Ijiji begin to murmur. They speak of the unfairness of their lot. They look at the high gods, the Anunnaki, who dwell in the cool, elevated palaces of the north, and they feel the first sparks of resentment. This is the birth of the first labor dispute in history, a conflict that predates the existence of the human race. The murmurings turn to whispered plots, and the plots turn to action. The Atrahasis tablets describe a moment of sudden, violent decision. The Ijiji decide they will no longer carry the yoke of the high gods. They take their tools, the very instruments of their servitude, and cast them into the fire. The picks, the shovels, and the baskets are consumed by the flames. It is a symbolic and practical rejection of their purpose. They are no longer workers. They are rebels. Under the cover of darkness, the Ijiji move as a single, silent mass toward the residence of Enlil. Enlil is the counselor of the gods, the stern administrator of earth and the atmosphere. His house is a place of order and command, but tonight that order is about to be shattered. The rebels surround the gates. They carry torches that flicker against the mud brick walls, casting long, dancing shadows that alert the guards to a presence that should not be there. Inside the palace, Kalkal, the gatekeeper, is the first to notice the gathering storm. He wakes Nusku, the vizier, who in turn wakes the great Enlil. The scene is one of mounting panic within the halls of power. Enlil is a being of law and discipline. The idea of a revolt is not just a threat to his safety, but an affront to the cosmic order he represents. He demands to know who has incited this gathering. He asks why the tools are burning and why the workers have left the mines. Nusku peers through the darkness at the sea of angry faces. He sees the younger gods, his own kin, standing in defiance. He returns to Enlil with a message of grim reality. The revolt is total. There is no single leader to arrest, no small faction to appease. The entire labor force has stopped. The work has ceased. The supply of gold has dried up. The crisis is not just a riot, it is an economic and existential collapse. Enlil's first instinct is one of force. He is a commander who believes in the hierarchy. He calls for his weapons. He wants to confront the rebels and drive them back to the pits. But the situation is more complex than a simple uprising. These are not slaves in the traditional sense. They are lesser gods, and their grievances are rooted in the physical reality of their exhaustion. A great assembly is called. The high gods descend from the heavens or travel from their distant domains to deliberate. Anu, the father and king of the gods, is present. Enki, the master of the deep waters and the most brilliant scientist among the Anunnaki, takes his seat. The air in the assembly hall is thick with tension. Enlil demands that the ringleaders be identified and executed. He views the strike as a betrayal of their mission. However, Anu, the elder and more detached observer, offers a different perspective. He asks the vizier to go out and speak with the rebels once more. He wants to know the depth of their suffering. When Nusku returns, he brings a message that resonates with a haunting clarity. The Ijiji say that the work is too much, the labor is too heavy, and the misery is too great. Every single one of them has declared war on the toil. This is the turning point of the narrative. The high gods realize that they cannot simply force the Ijiji back into the mines. The threat of total war among the gods looms over the assembly. If the Ijiji are not appeased, the entire project on Earth will fail. But the gold is still needed. The labor must be performed. The cosmic machinery requires a workforce that can endure the conditions of the Earth without the psychological burden of immortality or the social status of divinity. It is here that Enki, the clever and resourceful architect of life, speaks. He does not suggest more punishment. Instead, he proposes a radical, unprecedented solution. He looks at the world around them, a world filled with biological potential, and he sees a way to bridge the gap. He suggests the creation of a substitute, a creature that can carry the yoke of the gods, a being that possesses enough intelligence to follow instructions and use tools, but is not themselves a god. The assembly falls silent as the implications of Enki's proposal sink in. They are talking about artificial life, or more accurately, the manipulation of existing life to serve a specific purpose. They are talking about the creation of a worker who will not rebel because it is built for the task. This is the moment where the story of the gods shifts into the story of humanity. The Ijiji strike has created a void, a crisis of labor that threatens the very foundations of the Anunnaki presence on Earth. The solution will require a mastery of the building blocks of life itself. The gods are no longer just miners or administrators, they are about to become creators. They will reach into the clay of the earth and the essence of their own being to fashion something new. The transition from the divine to the biological is about to begin. The rebellion in the mines has set the stage for the most ambitious experiment in the history of the planet. The crisis of labor will be solved not by force, but by innovation. The gods will find their substitute, and in doing so, they will change the course of evolution forever. The stage is set for the birth of a new kind of being, one that will inherit the toil of the gods and, eventually, the world they left behind. The air in the council chamber remains heavy. The decision has been made, but the execution remains a daunting task. Enki, the scientist, knows that this is not a simple matter of molding clay as the later myths would suggest. It is a matter of genetic compatibility, of blending the celestial with the terrestrial. The rebellion of the Ijiji has forced the hand of the Anunnaki, pushing them toward a technological frontier that will define the future of the human race. The mines remain dark, the tools remain in the ash. The Ijiji wait, their torches still burning, their eyes fixed on the palace where their fate, and the fate of a yet-to-be-born species, is being decided. The crisis of labor has reached its peak, and the only way forward is through the mystery of creation. The gods are about to play the role of the ultimate engineers, and the blueprint they are drawing is our own. This moment of tension, of quiet before the storm of creation, marks the end of the old order. The era of the gods doing their own work is over. The era of the surrogate has begun. The rebellion in the mines was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the transition from a world of divine labor to a world of human industry. The silence of the abandoned pits is the prelude to the first cry of a new species, a species born of necessity, crafted in the image of its masters, and destined to carry the burden of the stars. The transition from the sun-scorched mines of the south to the cool, subterranean chambers of the Abzu marks a pivotal shift in the trajectory of the Earth. Within these secluded laboratories, the physical exhaustion of the Ijiji gives way to the intellectual curiosity of Enki, the master of wisdom and the lord of the deep waters. The air here is different, thick with the scent of ozone and the rhythmic hum of technologies that defy modern categorization. It is a place of silence and precision, where the raw materials of the planet are no longer viewed as or to be extracted, but as a biological canvas to be rewritten. Enki stands at the center of this transition. He is described in the ancient tablets as a figure of immense foresight, a deity who navigates the boundary between the divine and the terrestrial. For him, the rebellion of the laboring gods is not merely a crisis of management, but an invitation to innovate. The problem is clear. The gold must be harvested to protect the atmosphere of Nibiru, yet those assigned to the task have reached their breaking point. The solution, however, requires a leap of biological engineering that borders on the forbidden. Enki proposes the creation of a replacement, a being that possesses enough intelligence to follow complex instructions and handle the sophisticated tools of the Anunnaki, yet remains tethered to the natural order of the Earth. The documentary voice reflects on the silence of Enki as he watches his creations. Does he feel pride, or does he feel a growing sense of dread? He has bypassed the natural laws of the planet to solve a temporary labor crisis, but in doing so, he has introduced a permanent anomaly into the cosmos. These beings are not quite gods, yet they are no longer purely of the Earth. They are a middle kingdom, a species defined by its longing for a home that it can see in the night sky but can never reach. As the workers are deployed to the mines of the Abzu and the fields of the Eden, the landscape of the planet begins to change. The wild, untamed world is being brought under the management of the hybrid workers. The sounds of industry fill the valleys. The first cities are not built for human comfort, but as administrative hubs for the Anunnaki masters. The humans are the laborers, the caretakers, and the servants. They move through the world with a sense of borrowed purpose, their lives measured by the quotas of gold and the cycles of the celestial calendar. The Enki protocol is a triumph of engineering, but it is also a profound transformation of the earthly experience. The red clay has been elevated, but it has also been enslaved. The divinity that was replicated in the laboratory is a double-edged sword. It provides the intelligence to build civilizations, but it also provides the awareness of the chains that bind them. The experiment is no longer confined to the sterile rooms of the Abzu. It is now out in the world, breeding, thinking, and dreaming. The red clay is alive, and it is starting to remember the gods who breathed life into it. The segment concludes by focusing on the eyes of the early humans. In those eyes, we see the first flickers of what will eventually become religion, art, and science. We see the legacy of Enki, a legacy of brilliance and burden. The red clay of the earth has been forever altered by the touch of the stars, and as the primitive workers begin to multiply, the masters realize that they have created something that may eventually outgrow its purpose. The experiment is successful, but the consequences are only just beginning to unfold across the ancient world. The sun rises over the Great Rift Valley, casting long shadows across a landscape that has remained largely unchanged for millions of years. Here, in the dust of East Africa, the story of life is etched into the very soil. It is a story told in layers of sediment, a slow and methodical recording of biological change that usually spans eons. For most species, the fossil record acts like a stop-motion film, showing the gradual transition from one form to another through thousands of tiny, incremental adjustments. But when the lens focuses on the transition to modern humanity, the film seems to skip a frame. It is not a subtle shift, but a jarring leap that defies the standard rules of natural selection. This is the mystery of the missing link, a biological void where a primitive ancestor should be, but instead, we find the sudden, polished emergence of Homo sapiens. In the traditional halls of paleoanthropology, Evolution is described as a slow climb. Species adapt to their environments over millions of years, driven by the ruthless engine of survival. However, approximately 200,000 years ago, something unprecedented happens. The brain size of the hominid lineage does not just grow, it explodes. It nearly doubles in volume in a geological blink of an eye. This expansion is accompanied by a radical restructuring of the skull, the descent of the larynx which allows for complex speech, and a sudden mastery over the environment that no other creature on Earth has ever displayed. The question that haunts the scientific community and fuels the ancient astronaut theory is simple. Where are the transitional forms? Where is the creature that stands halfway between the stooped, heavy-browed Homo erectus and the elegant, sophisticated Homo sapiens? The silence in the fossil record is deafening. While we find plenty of remnants of our more primitive cousins, the middle ground is ghost-like. It is as if a hand reached into the stream of time and pulled out one version of a creature, replacing it moments later with a vastly superior model. Proponents of the Anunnaki intervention theory suggest that this gap is not a failure of archaeology, but a signature of design. They argue that the reason we cannot find the missing link is that it does not exist in nature. In this view, the transition was not a natural walk, but a laboratory jump. The Anunnaki, possessing a mastery of genetic science that we are only now beginning to grasp, likely took the existing hominid stock and accelerated its development through artificial means. To understand the magnitude of this leap, one must look at the biological cost of being human. Our brains are incredibly expensive organs. They consume 20% of our total energy while making up only 2% of our body weight. For a hunter-gatherer on the ancient plains, such an organ is a massive liability unless it provides an immediate and overwhelming advantage. In the natural world, evolution rarely produces such high-risk, high-reward features so rapidly. It usually prefers the safe, the tested, and the gradual. Yet, here we are, equipped with a cognitive capacity that far exceeds what was necessary for simple survival. We did not just develop the ability to find food and avoid predators. We developed the ability to contemplate the stars, to create art, and to question our own origin. This over-engineering of the human mind is often cited as the primary evidence for an outside influence. The mystery deepens when we descend from the macroscopic level of fossils to the microscopic world of the genome. Within the very blueprint of our existence, there is a curious anomaly that scientists call chromosome 2. In all other great apes, there are 24 pairs of chromosomes. Humans, however, have only 23. For a long time, this was a puzzle. If we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees, why do we have fewer chromosomes? The answer was found when geneticists looked closely at chromosome 2. It appears to be the result of two separate chromosomes being fused together. While such fusions can happen in nature, the precision of this particular fusion is startling. It contains specific telomere sequences in the middle of the chromosome where they should only be at the ends. From the perspective of a documentary observer, this genetic fusion looks remarkably like a cut-and-paste job. It is a sophisticated piece of biological engineering that effectively separated humans from the rest of the primate world, creating a reproductive barrier and a new species overnight. If the Anunnaki were indeed looking to create a specialized worker, a creature with the strength of an animal but the intelligence of a god, this kind of genetic manipulation would be the logical path. They would not wait for 1,000,000 years of natural selection. They would reach into the code of life and rewrite it to suit their needs. This leads us to the concept of the Lulu, the primitive worker described in the ancient Sumerian tablets. These texts do not speak of a slow evolution. They speak of a deliberate act of creation involving the mixing of essence. The term essence in these ancient cuneiform scripts is often interpreted by modern theorists as a reference to DNA. The tablets describe how the god Enki and the birth goddess Ninhursag experimented with various forms before arriving at the perfect design. They sought a being that could understand instructions, use tools, and maintain the complex infrastructure of the gods, yet remain subordinate. When we look at the sudden appearance of modern humans and our unique genetic markers, the mythic story of the Lulu begins to look less like a fairy tale and more like a technical manual. The implications of this theory are profound. If we are the product of a genetic experiment, then the missing link is not a fossil waiting to be found in the dirt, but a laboratory process that took place in a controlled environment. This would explain why Homo sapiens appeared so suddenly and why we possess such a strange mix of traits. We are a walking paradox. We have the physical instincts of the primates we were derived from, yet we have a consciousness that seems alien to the natural world. We are capable of extreme violence and profound empathy. We are built for the earth, yet we feel a strange, haunting pull toward the heavens. The archaeological record also shows a curious lack of progress in tool making for hundreds of thousands of years, followed by a sudden and explosive diversification of technology. For nearly 1,000,000 years, Homo erectus used the same basic stone hand axe. It was a functional tool, but it never changed. There was no innovation, no desire for improvement. Then, with the arrival of the modern human, everything changes. Within a few thousand years, we go from stone flakes to bone needles to cave paintings to the foundation of cities. This cognitive explosion suggests that the hardware of our brains was suddenly upgraded, allowing for a level of abstract thought that had never existed on the planet before. Critics of this theory argue that the gaps in the fossil record are simply the result of the rarity of fossilization. They suggest that we just haven't found the right bones yet. But as our search becomes more thorough and our technology for dating and analyzing finds becomes more precise, the gap remains. The transition point is still a wall of silence. Every new discovery of an ancient hominid seems to branch off into a different direction, a dead end that does not lead to us. We remain the only species of our kind, a lonely branch on the tree of life that seems to have been grafted on rather than grown naturally. As we stand in the present day, looking back at our origins, the evidence for a missing link remains one of the greatest challenges to the standard narrative of human history. The biological evidence of chromosome 2, the sudden expansion of the cranium, and the leap in technological capability all point toward a moment of intervention. Whether that intervention was the result of a rare, natural mutation or the deliberate work of an advanced extraterrestrial race is a question that continues to divide the world. However, if we accept the possibility that we are a design species, the mystery of why evolution skipped a beat for us is solved. The beat didn't skip. It was redirected. The landscape of the ancient world is littered with the remnants of this transition. We see it in the ruins of the first civilizations that appeared out of nowhere with fully formed languages and laws. We see it in the persistent myths of gods who descended from the sky to grant mankind the gifts of civilization. And we see it every time we look in the mirror and wonder why we are so different from every other creature on this planet. We are a species with amnesia, searching for a father figure that may have left the Earth long ago, leaving behind a biological legacy that continues to evolve, to grow, and to question the very hands that shaped it. The missing link is not a bone. It is the story of our creation, written in the language of the stars and hidden within the coils of our own DNA. The experiment was not just a success, it was a transformation that changed the trajectory of the Earth forever. As we peel back the layers of our past, we find that the truth of our origin may be far more complex and far more orchestrated than we ever dared to imagine. Deep within the fertile basin of the Mesopotamian Valley, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers once carved a path through a lush, untamed wilderness, lies the shadow of a place known to history as Eden. In the ancient Sumerian texts, this region is referred to as the Din, a name that translates literally to the abode of the righteous or the place of the lords. But in the context of this orchestrated history, the Din is not a simple paradise of leisure. It is a biological containment zone. It is a high-tech sanctuary and a state-of-the-art laboratory where the architects of our species conduct their most ambitious and controversial work. The Anunnaki have successfully created a worker, the Lulu. This being is strong, capable of manual labor, and resilient enough to survive the harsh conditions of the gold mines. However, the Lulu is essentially an automaton. It lacks the capacity for complex reasoning, it cannot innovate, and most importantly, it cannot reproduce on its own. The Anunnaki are faced with a logistical crisis. The demand for gold is relentless, and the strain of constantly cloning new workers in artificial birth chambers is becoming an unbearable burden on their resources. To solve this, the master scientist Enki proposes a radical shift in the project. He intends to grant the workers the ability to propagate their own kind, effectively turning a manufactured product into a self-sustaining species. This transition marks the beginning of the second phase of the genetic experiment. It is here, within the secluded walls of the E.DIN, that the prototype for modern man is refined. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming flora, but beneath the natural beauty lies the hum of unseen technology. We observe Enki, known in later mythologies as the serpent or the bringer of wisdom, as he works within his biological workshop. He is not merely mixing blood and clay. He is editing the very code of life. He identifies the specific genetic inhibitors that keep the Lulu in a state of perpetual childhood and removes them. He introduces a new sequence of genetic material, often described in the ancient tablets as the essence or the breath of life. This is the forbidden fruit. In the traditional biblical narrative, the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil is a literal apple that grants a moral awakening. But when viewed through the lens of genetic engineering, the fruit takes on a more physical and consequential meaning. It represents the final upgrade to the human genome. It is the introduction of the capacity for higher consciousness, abstract thought, and biological reproduction. By partaking in this knowledge, the hybrid species is no longer just a biological tool. It becomes aware. It becomes self-conscious. The moment of awakening is profound. The narrative describes the first pair of humans, Adam and Eve, or the Adapa and Tiamat of Sumerian lore, suddenly realizing they are naked. This is not a realization of physical modesty, but a sudden, jarring awareness of the self. They are no longer part of the background noise of the animal kingdom. They have been separated from the natural order. They possess an ego, a sense of past and future, and an understanding of their own mortality. They have stepped out of the fog of instinct and into the blinding light of sentience. This awakening, however, is not met with universal approval among the Anunnaki. A deep rift forms within the ranks of the celestial masters. Enlil, the brother of Enki and the supreme commander of the Earth mission, views this development with absolute horror. For Enlil, the mission is purely industrial. The humans were intended to be slaves, not equals. By granting them the ability to reproduce and the spark of higher intelligence, Enki has created a potential rival. Enlil fears that a species with the ingenuity of the gods but the volatility of a primitive animal will eventually become uncontrollable. He views the enlightened human as a biological threat to the stability of the Anunnaki hierarchy. The laboratory of Eden becomes a theater of political and ethical warfare. Enki argues that the humans deserve the chance to evolve, while Enlil demands that they be restricted or even destroyed. The serpent, the symbol of Enki and his medical staff, becomes the protagonist of human liberation in this version of the story. In the ancient world, the snake was not a symbol of evil, but a representation of the double helix of DNA and the wisdom of the earth. When the serpent encourages the humans to eat the fruit, it is an act of scientific rebellion. It is a clandestine laboratory procedure performed against the orders of the High Command. As the genetic modifications take hold, the physiological changes in the hybrids are significant. Their brain volume increases. The structure of their hands becomes more refined, allowing for the use of complex tools. Their vocal cords develop, enabling the birth of language. They are now Homo sapiens, the wise man, but this wisdom comes at a heavy price. The humans are no longer welcome in the controlled environment of the E.DIN. They have become too complex, too unpredictable, and too dangerous to be kept in a cage. The expulsion from the garden is the final step in the experiment. It is the moment when the laboratory doors are thrown open and the hybrids are cast out into the wild. They are forced to fend for themselves, to use their newfound intelligence to survive in a world that is no longer curated for their comfort. They take with them the genetic legacy of their creators, a double-edged sword of brilliance and destruction. They carry the mark of the gods in their blood, but they are tethered to the earth by their biology. We must consider the biological evidence of this sudden jump in evolution. Biologists often speak of the missing link, the elusive ancestor that bridges the gap between the primitive hominid and the modern human. In the fossil record, the appearance of Homo sapiens is remarkably sudden. We do not see the slow, gradual accumulation of small changes that Darwinian evolution would predict. Instead, there is a burst of complexity. There is a sudden mastery of fire, the creation of art, and the development of complex social structures. It is as if a switch was flipped. This shift coincides perfectly with the timeline of the Anunnaki narrative. If we are indeed a genetic experiment, our DNA should reflect this. Geneticists have discovered that human chromosome 2 is the result of a fusion between two ancestral chromosomes found in other primates. This fusion is a highly precise event that does not typically occur through natural selection. Furthermore, there are hundreds of genes in the human genome that have no clear evolutionary precursors. They appear out of nowhere, fully formed and functional. These are the genetic fingerprints of the laboratory in Eden. As these first humans migrate away from the Mesopotamian valley, they carry the instructions for civilization with them. They are no longer just workers. They are a new kind of entity on the planet. They are hybrids of the terrestrial and the extraterrestrial, a bridge between two worlds. They possess a deep, subconscious memory of their time in the laboratory, a memory that will eventually manifest in their religions, their myths, and their persistent longing for a lost paradise. The awakening of the hybrid is the most significant event in the history of the Earth. It is the moment the planet began to think for itself through the medium of human consciousness. But this consciousness is haunted by the circumstances of its birth. We are a species with an identity crisis. We are torn between our animal urges and our divine potential. We are the children of the E.Din, born from a mixture of celestial ambition and earthly necessity. The laboratory stands empty now, buried beneath millennia of silt and the shifting sands of time. But the experiment continues. Every time a human looks at the stars and wonders about their origin, the ghost of the Anunnaki experiment stirs. We are the living evidence of a forbidden act of creation. We are the fruit of a tree that was never meant to be harvested. And as we look back at the walls of that ancient sanctuary, we realize that the awakening was only the beginning. The real challenge for the hybrid was not surviving the expulsion, but surviving the burden of the knowledge we were never supposed to have. The atmosphere of the planet begins to shift long before the first drop of rain falls. In the high command centers of the Anunnaki, the instruments of celestial observation signal a terrifying reality. The orbital path of the planet is bringing it into a precarious alignment with a massive celestial body, and the gravitational stress is pushing the Earth toward a tipping point. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, the shelf is shifting. The masters of the gold mines and the architects of the human genome look toward the horizon, not with fear, but with a cold, calculated sense of timing. To the commander in Lil, this impending disaster is not a tragedy to be averted, but a convenient end to a project that has grown out of his control. The human experiment has become too successful. The hybrid workers, originally designed to labor in the mines of the South, have multiplied beyond the capacity of the Anunnaki to manage them. They have developed language, culture, and a burgeoning sense of self that threatens the hierarchical order of their creators. Enlil views the noise of humanity as a chaotic interference. In the Grand Council of the Gods, a decree is passed. There will be no warning given to the humans. As the ice cap slides into the sea and the great waves rise to reclaim the land, the Anunnaki will withdraw to their orbiting craft and watch as the waters erase their genetic footsteps from the face of the Earth. However, the creator of the human template, the scientist prince known as Enki, refuses to see his masterwork extinguished. For Enki, the human race is not a mere tool, but a biological achievement that carries the spark of the Anunnaki essence within its very marrow. He cannot openly defy the council, but he can engage in a subtle act of sabotage. This is the moment where the documentary of our history shifts from one of exploitation to one of clandestine survival. Enki seeks out a specific human, a king of the city of Shuruppak named Zayusadra, whom later texts call Utnapishtim or Noah. In the ancient accounts, Enki does not speak directly to the man, for that would violate the oath of the gods. Instead, he speaks to the wall of Zayusadra's reed hut, knowing the king is listening on the other side. He provides instructions not for a simple wooden boat, but for a submersible vessel capable of withstanding a global cataclysm. This craft is described in the oldest Sumerian tablets as a circular ship, a giant biological vault. It is not designed to carry every animal on the planet in a literal sense, but rather the genetic seeds, the DNA sequences, and the essential biological blueprints of the terrestrial ecosystem. As the Anunnaki prepare their departure, the Earth begins to groan. The narrative shifts to the perspective of the gods as they ascend in their gleaming chariots of fire. From the safety of the upper atmosphere, they look down upon the world they have ruled for hundreds of thousands of years. The sight is more horrifying than many of them anticipated. The great temple cities, built with precision and power that defy the laws of the era, are swallowed by a wall of water kilometers high. The screams of the millions below are silenced as the oceans surge over the mountains. The ancient texts describe the gods themselves as weeping, cowering against the walls of their ships, terrified by the scale of the destruction they have permitted. This is the Great Purge. The landscape is scoured clean. The massive mining operations, the sprawling agricultural networks, and the cities of the hybrids are buried under hundreds of feet of silt and debris. For the Anunnaki, the Earth is no longer a sustainable colony. The infrastructure is gone, and the environmental instability makes a continued presence on the surface impossible. The great departure begins. They prepare to leave the Earth and return to the home that has waited for them in the depths of the solar system. But as the waters recede, a single vessel rests upon the peaks of a new world. Enlil is furious to find that life has survived, but Enki makes a compelling argument. He points to the survival of the human seed as a sign of the species' inherent right to exist. He argues that the humans will now be necessary for the reconstruction of the world, for the Anunnaki no longer wish to labor on the surface. A new deal is struck between the masters and the survivors. The gods will no longer walk openly among men. They will retire to the heavens, leaving behind a new system of governance to manage the surviving human populations. This transition marks the birth of kingship. The Anunnaki introduced the concept of the divine right of kings, appointing human intermediaries who are granted a portion of their knowledge and authority. These kings are the ones who will build the first post-Diluvian civilizations in Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. They are given the measures of time, the secrets of the stars, and the laws of agriculture. The departure of the Anunnaki is not a disappearance, but a withdrawal behind a veil of ritual and religion. They leave behind the blueprints of civilization, but they take the advanced technology with them. The sabotaged extinction has worked. Humans have survived, but they are forever changed. They no longer live for centuries as the pre-flood patriarchs did. Their lifespans are shortened, perhaps through another genetic tweak by the Anunnaki to ensure the new generation does not become a threat. The world they inhabit is a ruin compared to the high-technology era of the gold mines. They are left to rebuild with stones and bronze, mimicking the grand architecture of their masters but lacking the power sources that once hummed within the ancient temples. The Great Departure also leaves a vacuum of power. As the primary fleet of the Anunnaki ascends, small factions remain, hidden in remote outposts or deep underground installations. These are the Watchers, the observers who remain behind to monitor the progress of the human experiment from a distance. The departure creates a permanent sense of longing in the human psyche, a memory of a time when the gods walked among us, and a promise that one day they will return. This expectation is woven into every major religion and mythology on the planet, a cultural scar left by the departure of our creators. We see the evidence of this transition in the sudden, unexplained appearance of fully formed civilizations in the Fertile Crescent. There is no slow evolution from hunter-gatherer to city builder. Instead, Sumer appears almost overnight with complex laws, mathematics, and astronomy that seem to have fallen from the sky. This is the legacy of the sabotage. Enki's decision to save humanity ensured that the knowledge of the Anunnaki would be preserved, albeit in a fragmented and ritualized form. The deluge was intended to be the final chapter of the human story, a way for the Anunnaki to close the book on an experiment that had become too complex. Instead, it became the beginning of our current era. The Earth was cleansed of the direct presence of the gods, leaving behind a race of hybrids who would spend the next several thousand years trying to remember who they were and where they came from. The departure changed the Earth from a cosmic mining colony into a planetary nursery, where the children of the Anunnaki would be left to grow in the shadows of the ruins their masters left behind. As we look at the massive megaliths that dot the globe, stones so large that no modern crane can lift them, we are seeing the remnants of the world before the purge. These structures were built by those who possessed the technology of the gods, and they survived the water only to stand as silent witnesses to a departed age. The Great Departure was a moment of profound abandonment. We were left with the tools to survive, but not the maps to understand our true origin. The masters went to the stars, and the hybrids stayed on the ground, looking up at the lights in the night sky and wondering which one was home. This era of transition defines everything we know about the ancient world. The survival of Ziusidra was not just the survival of a man, but the survival of a specific genetic lineage that carries the potential for greatness and the capacity for self-destruction. The sabotage of the purge meant that the human story would continue, but under a new set of rules. The gods were gone, the world was broken, and the long, slow climb toward the technological heights of our creators had begun. The Great Departure left us alone on a planet that was once a laboratory, and in the silence that followed, we began to tell stories about the heavens to fill the void where the Anunnaki used to be. The hum of the modern laboratory provides a stark contrast to the silent, wind-swept ruins of Mesopotamia. Here, under the sterile glow of fluorescent lights, scientists peer into the very fabric of existence. They are looking at the human genome, a vast and complex library of information that dictates every aspect of our biological reality. For decades, the focus remained on the genes that build our bodies and regulate our functions. Yet, as our understanding of deoxyribonucleic acid grew, a profound mystery emerged within the double helix. A staggering 98% of the human genome does not appear to code for any proteins at all. In the early days of genetic mapping, researchers dismissed this vast expanse as junk DNA. They viewed it as biological clutter, the discarded remnants of millions of years of messy evolution. But in the context of the Anunnaki hypothesis, this dark matter of the genome takes on a much more calculated and perhaps chilling significance. If we view the human being not as a product of random mutations but as a highly sophisticated biological machine, the presence of such a massive amount of non-coding information ceases to look like junk. Instead, it begins to resemble a storage drive. In the world of computer science, a programmer might leave vast amounts of inactive code within a system, perhaps as a placeholder for future updates or as a hidden archive of the program's history. If the Anunnaki were the master architects of the human race, it is highly probable that they would not leave their creation to the whims of nature. They would leave a signature. They would leave instructions, and they might leave a timer. The observational evidence of our biological history suggests a sudden and inexplicable leap in complexity. Around 200,000 years ago, the human brain underwent a radical expansion. This was not a slow, gradual increase in size, but a sudden explosion of cognitive capability that led to the development of complex language, abstract art, and organized society. Evolution usually moves with the agonizing slowness of a glacier, carving out changes over millions of years. This cognitive revolution happened in a geological heartbeat. For those who study the ancient Sumerian texts, this leap corresponds perfectly with the arrival and intervention of the Anunnaki. They claim that we were modified to serve, but also to eventually understand. The junk DNA may be the very bridge between our primitive origins and the advanced potential the Anunnaki intended for us to one day unlock. The current scientific consensus is shifting away from the term junk DNA. Researchers are discovering that these non-coding sequences are actually vital to the regulation of our active genes. They act as switches, turning certain traits on or off in response to environmental stimuli. This raises a provocative question. What happens if the stimulus required to flip those switches is not something found naturally on Earth? If our genome was engineered by an extraterrestrial intelligence, it stands to reason that the activation codes for our highest potential might be tied to cosmic cycles or the presence of the creators themselves. We may be walking around with a dormant operating system, waiting for a signal from the stars to initiate a global upgrade of the human species. Consider the legends found in almost every corner of the globe. From the Americas to the Far East, ancient traditions speak of a time when the gods walked among men and promised to return. These stories are often dismissed as the coping mechanisms of primitive peoples who felt abandoned by their rulers. However, when viewed through a biological lens, these myths might be the echoes of a deep-seated psychological programming. If the Anunnaki designed our brains, they likely understood how to instill a sense of longing, a biological drive to look toward the heavens and wait. This expectation of a return may not be a cultural construct, but a genetic one. It is a homing beacon embedded in our very cells, ensuring that the experiment remains tethered to its creators. As we look at the trajectory of modern technology, we see a species that is obsessed with reaching back into the stars. We build massive telescopes to peer into the deep past of the universe, and we send probes to the furthest reaches of our solar system. There is a sense of urgency in our exploration, a desperate need to find life beyond our own blue marble. Could this drive be part of the Anunnaki legacy? If we are their children, or perhaps more accurately, their property, then our curiosity is the tool they gave us to facilitate our eventual reunion. We are searching for them because we are programmed to recognize their signature in the cosmos. In recent years, the study of epigenetics has revealed that our environment and our experiences can leave chemical marks on our DNA, affecting how genes are expressed without changing the underlying code. Some theorists suggest that the Anunnaki did not just leave us with a static set of instructions, but with a dynamic system that responds to the proximity of their technology or their home world, the elusive planet Nibiru. If this celestial body follows a long, elliptical orbit that brings it close to Earth once every few thousand years, its gravitational or electromagnetic influence could serve as the trigger for major shifts in human consciousness. Every time the creators return to the neighborhood, the junk DNA in our cells might begin to hum with new activity, sparking the rise and fall of great civilizations. This leads to the most unsettling aspect of the Anunnaki hypothesis. If we are an experiment, what is the goal? Some suggest that we are a workforce, designed to mine gold or provide labor. Others believe we are a biological vessel, meant to carry the consciousness of our creators across the vast distances of space. But there is a third possibility. Perhaps we are a long-term study in evolution, an attempt by an advanced race to see if intelligence can be cultivated from a primitive stock. In this scenario, the junk DNA is the logbook of the experimenters. It contains the record of every modification, every success, and every failure. And if the experimenters are on their way back, they will not be looking for our monuments or our history books. They will be looking at our blood. We see the reflection of this possibility in our current obsession with genetic engineering and transhumanism. We are now at the point where we can edit our own code, using tools like CRISPR to remove diseases or enhance traits. In doing so, we are stepping into the shoes of the Anunnaki. We are becoming the architects. Is it possible that the creators are waiting for us to reach this specific level of technological maturity before they reveal themselves? The return of the gods might not be a physical arrival in golden chariots, but a synchronization of frequencies. Once we have the capability to read the full message hidden in our non-coding DNA, we may find a set of coordinates, a greeting, or a warning. The silence of the cosmos is often called the Fermi paradox. If the universe is so vast and so old, where is everyone? The answer might be closer than we think. They are not out there. They are in here. They are the silent partners in our biology, watching through the eyes they designed, and waiting for the moment when the experiment reaches its conclusion. The junk DNA is not a graveyard of evolutionary mistakes. It is a waiting room. It is the repository of our untapped potential, a vast reservoir of power and knowledge that remains locked away until the masters of the house return to turn the key. As we continue to map the human genome with ever-increasing precision, we find sequences that seem to defy the logic of natural selection. These are highly conserved regions, segments of DNA that have remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of thousands of years. In any other species, these regions would drift and mutate over time. In humans, they remain static, as if they are being protected by some internal mechanism. These are the anchors of our identity, the parts of us that were never meant to change. They are the core of the Anunnaki blueprint, the fundamental code that defines what it means to be human in their image. The possibility that we are waiting for our creators changes the way we view our place in the universe. We are no longer the accidental kings of a lonely planet. We are a project. Our religions, our wars, and our triumphs are all part of a larger narrative that was written long before the first city was built. We are the inheritors of a legacy that is both divine and artificial. And as the stars align and the ancient cycles turn, the tension in our genetic code begins to pull. We look up at the night sky not just with wonder, but with a strange, haunting recognition. The great departure may have left us in silence, but the silence is not empty. It is a pause in a much longer conversation. The junk DNA is the record of what has been said, and the blank space where the next chapter will be written. When the creators return, they will find a species that has grown in the shadow of their memory. A species that is finally ready to look its makers in the eye and ask the question that has been coded into our cells from the beginning. Why were we made, and what are we intended to become? The answer is hidden in the 98% of us we have only just begun to explore.